You know what really grinds my gears? When indie developers sell out to AAA studios. Microsoft is a large example of this, as they've come to own Rare, Mojang, Double Fine, Ubisoft, and plenty more. But this is a story of something more than the fall of an indie game. It's the fall of a widely used gameplay element, the fall of one of the most renowned indie creators, and even the fall of a community. This is the fall of Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is a game that everyone from your uncle to your Fairly Odd Parents know about, whether you played it yourself, watched Let's Players take their shot at it, or love the superb memes. It's a topic that's widely praised throughout the internet, and it fills my heart to see that Cawthon is getting praise for his amazing games. Or should I say, got praise? I guess I should take a closer look at the history of the FNAF franchise before I dive deeper into where the games stand today. There once was a man named Cawthon who spent tireless hours on both film projects for other people and working on game animations, whether it was for other people or for games of his own. The games he made himself would get constant blame for his animated characters looking too fearful or unsettling. So instead of feeling despised by this, he decided to put it to his advantage and make a game centered around that exact fear. From there, game after game, praise after praise, map pack game theory after map pack game theory, Cawthon's new game series Five Nights at Freddy's took storm and swept the entire country with praise. Cawthon worked on 8 mainstream FNAF games all by himself until he teamed up with Steel Wool Studios, and since then they've helped him with his future projects such as the VR FNAF game Help Wanted. And then the day came. Cawthon, the man behind it all, retired from the series. He's no longer going to be in charge of helping out with the games that took the world by storm, but even without the man himself, the series is still moving forward. Steel Wool Studios is now working on Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, being the first FNAF game to not only be produced without Scott as its baseline, but the first ever free roaming game in the series. For such a large and widely known series, this is a big step for the game, right? Well, in order to answer that, we need to discuss what made the game so popular in the first place. Well, it wasn't just the frightening animatronics, spooky aesthetics, or intriguing lore, no. Most of the fun and love for the game had a lot to do with the game itself and how it played. In Five Nights at Freddy's, there's something that I like to call the FNAF loop. It's a gameplay style that was popularized by the first game in the series, in which you stay where you are and protect yourself by strategically conserving power, using cameras, and taking risks that spice up the tense and exhilarating gameplay. In order to take a clear look at what this loop is, let's see how it's used in the game that started it all off. The gameplay included the player monitoring an entire building, and rather than getting up and walking throughout the building, you have to check old rusty live cameras that monitor the entire building. The unreliability of these cameras not only add a sense of uncertainty, but the gameplay itself. Is that just a shadow, or is that a deadly animatronic heading down the halls? Are those particle effects, or the beating eyes of a bloodthirsty monster? Having to look and sometimes even listen carefully to the unreliable footage is so much of the meat of the gameplay. This goes great alongside the power conservation. These camera screens, flashlights, and doors that protect you from intruders are essential for survival. Using your tools wisely, carefully, and conservatively spices up the whole game, and is something that the game really couldn't do anything without. And when this fun and interactivity meet with the horror of the FNAF world, they mix together like mint and chocolate. All these swift decisions and focusing and precision give the player a sense of panic, adrenaline, and terror when it all gets mixed. Now, the question that's left to answer is, do the previous installments of the game fulfill the iconic gameplay loop that fits so close to home in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise? Well, the second game actually does this and even more. Adding new situational management to the mix, such as a music box to wind, flashlights necessary to see through the dark, and no doors. Peering down a hallway and anxiously keeping an eye to the vents to your sides to make sure that you're prepared to hide yourself from the next encounter of a deadly robot by equipping a stuffed mask on your head blew me away! The second game really outdid itself. As for the third game, sure, it added new mechanics such as vent doors, audio playbacks, and fixing system devices, but it lacked a lot of where the loops went in the previous games, and it only goes downhill from here. The fourth game took tons of work into it being scary and only a little into the gameplay. Sister Location is where we see the complete annihilation of the FNAF loop. Every night is its own gimmick and none of them share any similarities to the game's FNAF loop. FNAF World was once again an entirely different game, and Pizza Simulator tried a bit hard but was nonetheless a separate type of game. Then we get to Ultimate Custom Night and Help Wanted, which I have to admit did a really good job of bringing back that loop while adding their own separate spice to it. Even with Help Wanted just implementing VR to the same games as the previous ones, and Ultimate Custom Night ripping characters and gameplay mechanics from the prior games, that's still a fun and refreshing way to make a game. Success from taking inspirations from previous outdated games is very common, with games such as Metroid Dread, Sonic Mania, and Super Mario Maker getting so much renown for this technique. So with all that said, where does Security Breach stand in all of this? Well, let's look at it this way. Many people take the FNAF loop and make their own games out of it, such as Five Nights at Candy's or One Night at Flumpty's. They are considered FNAF games even though there are no Five Nights at Freddy's characters present within the game. So let's take that logic and reverse it back to the original games. Imagine that instead of the characters or setting of the game being these animatronics and in a pizzeria setting, replace them with Baldi in his schoolhouse. If we made that change, would the game still be recognizable as a FNAF game? First game, oh yes. Second game, absolutely. Third game, most likely. Fourth game, Sister Location, incredibly unlikely. FNAF World, not a chance. Pizzeria Simulator, possibly. Ultimate Custom Night, yup. Help Wanted, yup. And Security Breach would literally just become Baldi's basics. Free roaming and retreating from enemies in a disturbing and lonely setting, this game would be plenty more similar to other horror games such as Silent Hill, Bendy and the Ink Machine, or Slender Man. And without the father of the FNAF loop, Scott Cawthon, helping out with the series, we have little to no chance of getting another original classic game like we did in the past. This is pretty depressing. So once Security Breach makes its debut and releases to the public, should we ignore it and go back to playing the older games? Absolutely not. Even though Security Breach does not have the original grace Five Nights at Freddy's brought onto its community, that doesn't make it a horrible game. Those games I compared Security Breach to earlier, such as Silent Hill, Bendy, and Slender Man, they're all still amazing games. Breath of the Wild, for example, was a game that took an entirely different approach than its predecessing games. But that didn't make it a horrible game, not at all! The game's open world, vast possibilities, and fun combat, even though they're unique, are still amazing pieces to the game. So even if Security Breach doesn't have the cameras, doors, vents, or flashlights, that doesn't mean it's going to be a horrible game. What it means is that it's not going to be a FNAF game. Call me crazy, call me boastful, or call me insane, this is how I stand on the Five Nights at Freddy's series at this time. I'm aware that this is a decently controversial subject, but this just means I get to hear more thoughts out of you guys in the comments section, to hear what you all have to say and what I got terribly wrong. I know that there's still a lot in common with Security Breach and its predecessors, with the characters, lore, and same type of cryptic storytelling, but through my eyes, I take into consideration the gameplay of the game a lot more than the story of the game. I hope I could show you folks at home a thing or two about the games of FNAF, and until next time, thank you for listening.